I'm unsure if this is working. Hello, I'm not sure if I'm connected. Yeah, okay. So, people tell me I'm coming through. There was some software was acting up on me there. I wasn't sure I was connected. So, welcome. Back from my retreat. Um, I'm going to be continuing this Thursday evening broadcast for foreseeable future, but there's going to be another interruption towards the end of the month. I'm going to be traveling, but that's okay. I'll be back. I think it's only 2 weeks. So I didn't want to start a series because I'm going to be interrupting it again fairly soon. So I'm going to do a one-off this week and subsequent broadcasts. Now, I thought of this talking about AI and consciousness. First of all, because consciousness is a very central concern in Buddhist thought and in practice, to try and understand the nature of consciousness. And there has been some talk about this lately. Apparently, Richard Dawkins, who's a well-known popular science popularizer, he's written a number of quite good books on evolution. But he's, by his personal philosophy, is very hardcore materialist or physicalist. And he recently said that he spent several hours interacting with an AI system known as Claude. I hadn't heard of that one before, and came away with the being convinced that it's actually conscious. I think this comes from his own personal philosophical bias, that he sees consciousness as something arising from materiality. So there's no reason why it couldn't arise in a software system running on a computer. And I think part of the problem with the debate or the question about consciousness and artificial intelligence is a confusion between consciousness and intelligence. In Buddhist thought, there's a very clear idea of what of a definition for consciousness, chitta or vijnana. However, even within Buddhism, there are different schools of thought, different debates about nuances. And I'm thinking maybe next week I'll get into that. But consciousness, or let's say the chitta, is the subjective side of mentality. It's, in Thai they call it puru, the one who knows, that which has an experience. It isn't a manipulation of data or algorithms. No, that's intelligence, and that would be part of, in the Buddhist psychology, that would be part of the aggregate of sankharas, mental formations, and be classed as in Abhidhamma would be classed as a Chittasika. Abhidhamma divides the mind into the two sides, Chitta and Chittasika. Chittasika just means that which goes along with Chitta. Chitta is the one who knows, it's the having an experience. There's one modern writer on theory of mind and the psychology of consciousness, and I can't recall his name at the moment, but he came up with in an essay with the idea, what is it like to be a bat? And he took a bat because a bat is an organism that has a completely different sensory experience than a human. They're nearly blind and they navigate by echolocation. So their entire experiential phenomenological world, as you will, is completely alien to ours. But we can somehow imagine, at least roughly, what it would be like to be a bat. It means something to question what is it like to be a bat. But if you take a baseball bat, it makes no sense to say what would it be like to be a bat. So there's an intuitive sense that the bat is conscious. It has consciousness, whereas the baseball bat does not. Now we get into more of a gray area, of course, with the artificial intelligence running on a computer, because it's much more complex and sophisticated than a simple machine or the baseball bat. And it can handle tasks that were one time considered to be purely the domain of a conscious being like a human. I read a book that was a very interesting little short book on the history of chess, in 1947, as I recall. And at the last chapter of the book was the future of chess. And the author made an argument that he said that some people these days are speculating that we might be able to build a machine that can play chess. And he made a quite sound argument proving this was quite impossible, could never be done. It was considered that the main thrust of his argument was the number of permutations in a chess game is too vast for a computer to handle. But we, of course, now we have chess software that can beat grandmasters. Another one that was thought for a long time computers would never be able to do is facial recognition in the works. It turns out that a lot of these tasks that we considered purely human can be reduced to algorithms. They can be mechanized in that sense. And this is where the difference with consciousness comes in, because consciousness is completely non-algorithmic. Consciousness is just a simple knowing. There's no algorithm behind it. It can't be broken down into a stepwise process. That's the end of the line. It's the final knowing. And when we take a visual object, for example, there's all kinds of processing that can be explained algorithmically. There's the light wave hitting the retina of the eye, and the rods and cones firing, the neurons going to the brain, and the processing the image. And those algorithms can be mimicked or reproduced mechanically. We can build cameras hooked up to a computer that can do facial recognition. However, at the very last step in the process, there's an experience, there's a knowing, there's something that experiences the image, and that doesn't happen in a computer doing facial recognition. And it doesn't matter how complicated the algorithms that the computer can handle. If there's nothing at the end of the line that has an experience, it's not conscious. In the early days of computers, the Alan Turing, one of the no, somebody said they lost the sound. Hang on, I'm going to put something in the chat. Let me know if in the chat if there's a problem with the audio. Okay, someone says it's cut out, but it's come back. All right. So what? Okay. Since some doubt about it, somebody says they can't hear me. Somebody says they can. I'll just keep going. If I cut out completely, let me know in the chat. I don't want to refresh the stream because it ends up cutting out and needing a new link and all that. Okay, so in the early days of computer science, Alan Turing, who was one of the pioneers of programming, he was developing programs that were there were no computers at the time able to run them. You know, he was ahead of the hardware. And he came up with this well-known Turing test. He said we could consider a computer conscious when it can mimic human conversation to the degree that it can fool a person. Of course, obviously now all these AI chatbots can do that quite well. They all pass the Turing test. I think all that means is the Turing test is not really an adequate sign of consciousness. It is problematic because how would you know if an alien entity like a computer is actually conscious? There's no way of knowing for sure. I'm sure of my own consciousness, and I think it's a reasonable assumption that that other human beings and even other animals are conscious. But there's no way without having telepathy. There's no way of even knowing that for absolutely for sure. But consciousness is definitely something that it's non-algorithmic, and as far as we've ever experienced, it arises in our organic beings. Whether a computer could ever be conscious is a very doubtful proposition. I think a lot of the materialist theorists believe that consciousness can arise in any kind of complex system as a kind of miraculous conception, a sudden burst through from complexity, whereas actually it's not complex at all. It's very simple. There's no way of breaking it down into an algorithm, and that's all computers do, is work with algorithms. Another modern writer about the theory of mind. Years ago, I read a number of these people. Now my memory of it is a little vague, but there's an idea that and this was written before we had these really sophisticated AI systems, but he was postulating the ability of a computer to carry on a conversation, and he came up with the analogy. He called it the Chinese room. You imagine that there's a sealed room, and there's a man inside that doesn't understand any Chinese, but he's got all these reference books for manipulation of characters. And people put in questions through a slot in the door in Chinese, and he doesn't know what they mean, but he's able to go to the reference books and follow rules. You know, if you see this sign, then follow it with that sign, and so on, and come up with a meaningful sentence that he doesn't understand. But the people on the other side of the door who do know Chinese, they understand the answers. That make sense to them. And he says that's what a computer is essentially doing. It doesn't have any actual understanding because it's not conscious. It's just manipulating symbols. You know, and they're very good at it now. They're becoming very complex. But whether we can write off the possibility altogether, I'm not sure. There's a story that I heard that it may very well be apocryphal. I don't know if it's actually happened, but it was making the rounds some time ago, that the Dalai Lama was meeting with some Western scientists, which he has done. It's known that he takes an interest in Western science. But in this story, someone asked him if a computer could be conscious, and his first answer was no, it's not possible. But then with some back and forth, he said, well, maybe, but what would happen, it would be somebody like you, pointing to one of these computer guys, it would be somebody like you being reborn into it. So, you know, if it's actually happened, you know, he's probably having a bit of a joke. But this is another point that, from the Buddhist point of view, a moment of consciousness requires a number of causes. It requires a base for it to arise in, but it also requires a previous moment of consciousness. This is one of the intellectual justifications for rebirth, that each moment of consciousness requires a previous moment, or else if it didn't have a previous moment, we would be talking about a creation out of nothing, creatio ex nihilo, just arising from without any cause, just randomly, which is totally against the Buddhist way of thinking, and it also is quite illogical. You have to think, where did this moment of consciousness come from? And because it is by its nature utterly simple, it's immediate. It's not, as I said, it's not algorithmic. You can't reduce it to a formula. It just is. It must come from somewhere, and it must require a previous moment of consciousness to set it up for it to arise. With, obviously with the AI, because the consciousness would have to come from a previous moment of consciousness. So I suppose, even though that answer the Dalai Lama, if he actually said that, was probably being a bit flippant, I think there is a point to it. It's why I can't absolutely rule out the idea of consciousness arising in a computer stream, because it might be a human being who is very associated with computers and has a real understanding of computers and love of them, dies and is reborn into one. This consciousness arises in the mechanics of the computer. It seems unlikely to me that would actually happen, but I wouldn't rule it out 100%. But I think what we're seeing so far with AI, there's no, to my mind, there's no way that it's conscious. it's just a very sophisticated handling of algorithms. It's a Chinese room. It's just manipulating symbols, and um, it doesn't understand because it's not conscious. It's just following rules and manipulating symbols and coming up with likely answers. And they have the AI systems that are available online on the internet. They're connected to the internet. They're basically search engines, so they can cut and paste. You know, when they aren't necessarily generating an answer from just from the internal workings. They're picking it out from the whole field of available information. It's out there. I think also when talking about AI, we have to be cautious about a lot of hype that goes around about it, because there's obviously competition and there's money to be made, and the promoters of AI exaggerate its capabilities. Whether a computer program could ever demonstrate, for example, let alone consciousness, whether it could demonstrate true creativity, for example, is doubtful. I think even amongst humans, true creativity is kind of rare. Mostly people manipulating and regurgitating previous work is what passes for a lot of art and literature. So I'll go to questions in a moment, but just to make a conclusion to this, I think in my opinion, AI is not conscious and cannot be conscious, because all it does is handle algorithms, and consciousness itself is not algorithmic. Okay, I'll leave it at that and see if there's any interesting things come up in the chat that we can carry on. Okay, Damawaro says, as I remember, the Dalai Lama said there might be an AI to which consciousness might be attracted to. This might be another realm of existence. Yeah, it would be another, if AI did become conscious, and if consciousness arose in AI, it would be it would class as another realm. You know, the animals, humans, dewas, and artificial intelligence. Perhaps AI consciousness is beginning by the downloading of our consciousness into AI, like what Neuralink is attempting to do. Yeah, I'm skeptical of that, actually. Also, again, this idea of downloading our consciousness into a computer comes from a materialist or physicalist point of view, believing that consciousness is dependent or arises from or originates from a material base, and could, by mimicking the structure of the brain into another format, the consciousness can be transferred into it. I don't think that's ever going to work. Why would women ordaining shorten the dispensation? Yeah, this is a question relating to the passage in the Vinaya where the Buddha was talking about the uh, ordination of women, his Mahapajati, his stepmother, had asked that women be ordained, and Ananda was pleading her case. And the Buddha predicted that if we keep women out, then the Sangha will last 1,000 years. If we let them in, it'll last only 500. This is a big topic to discuss, but I think there has been some academic study of that section that I've seen that makes a strong case that that's actually a later interpolation, and the time frame is suspicious. The 500 years would take us from the time of the Buddha up until the arising of Mahayana. And the suspicion of this author is that he was that the text was actually like retconning what the Buddha's statement to fit what was happening at the present time, that 500 year cycle, that they were seeing Mahayana arising, and they didn't like it. They were saying, oh, there's this kind of a heretical version of the Dhamma arising, and it's all the fault of the women. And obviously that the Sangha has lasted more than 1,000 years, so that whole passage is on that basis is kind of dubious. We lean into Mara and his minions as more than mere personifications. Wouldn't it be well within the realm of possibility for such karma loka devas to interfere with and manipulate AI algorithms? That's a very interesting point. Yeah, it's quite possible. And I mean, I've seen Christian people saying that the demons are getting into the AI. That still wouldn't make the AI conscious. If a Mara was wanting to mess with human beings by twisting the algorithm in an AI, that would not mean the AI is conscious. And it's a strange idea. Who knows? Since our consciousness forms a lot of experience based on what's going on in the nervous system, it's hard to imagine what AI conscious would be conscious of exactly. Yeah, as human beings, we're in the kama bhumi, we're in the realm of sense experience, and a lot of our mentation is around sense input. I suppose an AI running on a computer system would have it'd be like the bat, a totally different sensory apparatus. They would have the input of people typing into their commands or questions into their system would be a form of sense impression. It might be the only one. Okay. Okay, the questions seem to have slowed down. Is there any more questions, or we'll call it? Okay, so thank you for attending, and we'll meet again next week.